Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 36 of It's Murder Up North. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to Kathy, who is the show's latest Patreon member. I hope that this podcast brings you a little taste of home, now you are living in the States. My podcast of the week is a show I did mention in one of my earliest episodes. However, since then, there has been a change in co-host. But the show is still amazing, and if you haven't already done so, I highly recommend checking out Eileen and Charlie with their show Crimelapse. Here is a sneak peek.
They murdered her. A vile and disgraceful act.
We were able to discover the remains of 2 humans.
Welcome to Crimelapse. I am Eileen.
And I'm Charlie.
Crimelapse is a true crime podcast that uses primary audio, in-depth research and emotive narration to give you an immersive insight into the darkest tales and most horrifying crimes.
Find Crimelapse wherever you listen to podcasts and at Crimelapse Podcast or at Crimelapse Pod on social media. Everyone has a story to tell, so why not let us tell you some?
Now, let's head to the episode. He wanted to be a judge. He wanted to be an actor. He wanted to be a sports star. I'll never get to see what his children will be like. All I know is that I miss him. And it should never have happened. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to hold my son. It's not allowed, because you will contaminate evidence. Grief never goes away, but you just learn to live and cope. These were the words of G. Walker, lamenting the death of her son Anthony and the loss of his future. I admit I did not know Anthony's story until I watched a drama on the BBC called Anthony, created by the writer Jimmy McGovern, who was inspired by conversations with G. Walker regarding her son's lost future. Jimmy created a film that showed the life Anthony Walker may have had if he hadn't been murdered. Anthony's parents moved to the UK from the town of St. Thomas in Jamaica, with hopes of providing a better future for their family. They initially settled in Toxteth in Liverpool, an area which offered a diversity of different cultures. However, during the 60s, 70s and 80s, the area was also one of the most deprived in the city. Many residents lived in squalid conditions, in homes that housed multiple families. Although to call them homes would be false. The properties were damp, crumbling buildings. Some had no running water and were infested with cockroaches and rats. It was not uncommon to find one family sharing just one room, in houses that were multi-let properties. The high unemployment and dismal living conditions caused resentment among the residents. The community was being torn apart by slum clearances, and citizens lived in fear of racial attacks, which were a regular occurrence. Derek Hatton, former deputy leader of the Liverpool City Council, stated, quote, "I think in 1981 many in the city were totally unaware of its black population. Liverpool's black community was different to most in one important respect. It was not a new immigrant community. It had been there for many years. They wore the same clothes, spoke the same Scouse, and many were mixed race." End quote. In fact, Liverpool had a long history as a multicultural city. It is home to the oldest Chinatown in the UK, and many black families had lived in the city since the 18th century. But this diversity did not prevent racial tensions. During the 1970s, the resentment lingered. Unemployment, racial segregation, and inequality stirred up tensions. The police force were perceived to discriminate against black youths, whom they would conduct stop and searches on without probable cause. It came to a head on Friday the 3rd of July 1981, when Leroy Cooper was stopped by police. He was subjected to what many considered a heavy-handed arrest and search, which angered a crowd of bystanders. Seething with years of resentment, the incident escalated, resulting in 9 days of rioting. Darren Rawlins recalled the events of July, stating, quote, "It was not a race riot. If you saw the number of white people involved, you could see that race didn't come into it. It was about unemployment, housing, education, equal rights, and so on. A sense of worthlessness and anger had been building up. The right to search laws were just an excuse for the police to go out, stop anyone, give them a going over. All the time we were being picked up. That's why we never went into the city. You knew what would happen." Lack of opportunities, poverty, and a rise in criminal activity, including drug dealing and vehicle theft, forced Steve and G. Walker to move from Toxteth. They settled in Huyton, a town roughly 7 miles east of Liverpool city centre. Being positioned on the outskirts of the city, Huyton offered them a place where they felt their children would have a more secure upbringing and better opportunities. It did not take them away from racist attitudes. When Steve, G and their 5 children arrived in Huyton, they were the first black family to live in the community, and this led to them being called derogatory names. G recalled one incident, quote, "A gang of boys stood around me, calling names. I stood in front of my pram, protecting my baby. I wasn't raised to be afraid of anyone. I just said, right, I can't beat 4 of you up, but I'll take you on, one by one. They threw something at my pram. I would have taken them on. They were messing with my child." She also reflected on how her children were the victims of prejudiced individuals, including a school bus driver, quote, "There were times when my children got on the school bus wearing their school uniform, and they were told to get off the bus by the bus driver. There were times coming home when they had to choose which bus to get on, safely without repercussions." Anthony Walker was born on the 21st of February 1987. He was raised in a loving household, brought up with the Christian values of compassion and forgiveness. It wasn't an easy life for Anthony and his siblings, especially after their parents separated, but Anthony was there for his mother, who described her son as her rock, and stated, quote, "My Anthony was the epitome of goodness. He was loving, caring, selfless, wise beyond his years." Despite the financial hardships that faced the single mother raising 6 children, G ensured her family had the love and support they needed. She encouraged them to follow their dreams and delighted in their passions. Anthony's passion was for basketball, and he possessed a natural talent for the sport. He played for the Liverpool City Hoops and was offered a trial to play for England. It was his devotion to his faith that prevented him from attending, as the trials were being held on a Sunday, meaning he had to attend church. His love of basketball led to the teenager establishing a team for local children, where they could learn to play, socialise, and more importantly, it provided them with something to do instead of loitering on the streets. He was described as a responsible young man, and since his parents divorced, he tried to fill the void left by his father. He was protective of his 3 older sisters, and according to his mum, he would come out with typical dad lines, such as, quote, "What time do you call this?" when the girls got home, and "Where do you think you're going dressed like that?" After leaving primary school, Anthony started at Knowsley Hay High School, where he proved himself to be a hard-working and intelligent young man. He achieved 7 GCSEs, allowing him to go to college, where he studied media, drama, IT and law. Alongside his studies, Anthony began working to help support his mum financially. G recalled, quote, "He was even helping me to pay the bills. He got his first job in McDonald's and gave me his first wage packet, about £50. He said we needed to replace the car because it was always breaking down. So we went down to the car dealership and paid a deposit because I wanted him to take responsibility. We got a 7-seater Jeep, and I made him think he'd purchased it. He was elated. I put in the rest, of course. He was in training to be a good man. The funny, intelligent and compassionate teenager had big dreams. He wanted to be successful, with ambitions of being an actor, basketball player or becoming a judge. He planned on travelling in America and wanted to study law at university. Anthony was so determined to achieve a career in law that he was even willing to leave the country to pursue it. He once said, quote, "If I have to leave England and go to America, I will do that and become a lawyer." Anthony also demonstrated a patient and level-headed attitude. He believed in walking away or talking through a disagreement and refused to get into a physical altercation. At the beginning of July 2005, while 18-year-old Anthony was out with his friends, he was attacked with a cricket bat. Although he was taken to hospital, Anthony refused to report the incident to the police, not out of fear, but out of compassion. He recognised the boy and knew he had learning difficulties. And G remembered, quote, "He was more concerned that the boy may have gotten a criminal record, because it was a deliberate act of hate. He begged me not to report it." Tragically, just 3 weeks later, Anthony would not be shown compassion or mercy when he was brutally attacked, all because of the colour of his skin. Night descended on Friday the 29th of July 2005. The sky was dark and starless. A thick black cloud covered the moon, and rain drummed on the pavements. The glow of the streetlights made the water droplets appear like diamonds on the foliage. Puddles shimmered, and the roads reflected the rays that emitted from vehicles rumbling by. Anthony was in the warmth of his home. It was his friend's birthday party that night, but his mum needed to attend a church meeting, and there was no one else to take care of Anthony's 2-year-old nephew, Reuben. So he selflessly offered to babysit, accompanied by his girlfriend Louise and his cousin Marcus. By 11 p.m, Anthony's mum had returned home, and the cousins set out to walk Louise to her bus stop. Once she was safely on the bus, Anthony planned to attend the 18th birthday party of his best friend, James Reed. It was a short walk to the yellow and grey shelter on St. John's Road, where they lingered, waiting for the arrival of the bus. Rain rattled repetitively on the glass, and the wind whispered with the sound of chatter from the Highton Park pub, which stood roughly parallel with the bus stop, separated only by a knee-high wall and a car park. As the trio stood chatting, their attention was drawn to the pub by 2 men, one of whom was talking loudly. It took a moment for them to realise that this hooded man, with a scarf concealing his features, was shouting at them. Anthony politely responded to the abuser, quote, "We're only waiting for the bus, and then we're going." This did not placate the man, who continued to shout out racist and derogatory terms. Marcus and Anthony sadly were used to hearing such hateful words, and tried to ignore them. But when the man began to target Louise for being with a black man, the trio made a decision to walk away from the situation. They calmly headed in the direction of McGoldrick Park, knowing that they could use it as a cut-through to get to another bus stop away from the abuser. Sticking together, they headed into the park. Shadows concealed the path. Trees creaked and groaned in the persistent wind, which howled and wailed across the playing fields. As they reached the gates to the park, 2 silent silhouettes emerged from the gloom and moved towards the group with frenzied pace. The pair grabbed at their prey, but Marcus and Louise slipped from their grasp. But Anthony was not so fortunate. He was tackled onto the gravel path and pinned to the ground. His cousin and girlfriend fled, racing to get help. Marcus hurried up the steps of the nearest house and began to hammer frantically on the door, screaming for someone to come to his aid. The light of the hallway was switched on, and the door swung open to the teenage boy pleading for the occupant to call the police. Marcus was the first to return with help, but by the time he had reached the park, the assailants had fled. His cousin lay in a heap on the floor, almost as though he had fallen asleep. But as Marcus got closer to the motionless form, he saw the handle of a mountaineering axe protruding from Anthony's head. When the ambulance arrived, Anthony was still alive, but not responsive. He was transported to Whiston Hospital, where, having assessed his injuries, doctors determined he required specialist treatment, and so the 18-year-old was transported to the Walton Neurological Centre. After being informed of the attack on her son, G arrived at the hospital, desperate to see Anthony. She was taken to her quiet room, and a nurse comforted her, explaining that the teenager was undergoing emergency surgery. Tragically, the axe had caused severe damage to Anthony's brain, an injury the surgeons knew he wouldn't survive, but they continued with the operation. Wishing to spare his family any more heartache, they removed the axe that was embedded in the boy's skull. It was a long and anxious wait for G. Walker, as the hours crept by. Fluorescent lights buzzed in the room where the mother sat in silence with her family beside her. Dawn broke at 5:25 a.m, coinciding with Anthony's time of death. G was denied her last chance to hold her son. His body was now evidence, and police wished to act quickly in finding Anthony Walker's killers. Unbeknownst to the police, the culprits were already 300 miles away in Dover, boarding the 6 a.m. ferry to Calais, and as they started their drive to Amsterdam, Assistant Police Constable Bernard Lawson was addressing the press, quote, "What we are dealing with here is an unprovoked and vicious attack on a young black man, which we believe to be racially motivated. This was a despicable act, and we are absolutely determined to find the people responsible. We believe the offenders are local, and we believe it is the responsibility of the local community to give these people up. There are a lot of decent people in the local area who are absolutely shocked by what has happened." That evening, Anthony's sister, Dominique, went in search of answers. Having learned of the incident at the bus stop, she went to the Highton Park pub, hoping to find someone who would have information about what happened. There was a group of youths stood in the car park. They provided her with two names, Paul Taylor and Michael Barton. This revelation must have taken her by surprise, as she would later state, quote, "I grew up with Paul. I knew him since I was 3, a small child. There was a time when they were good. We're all inherently good, in essence, but then they became bad." Anthony's mother also expressed her sadness when she learned the names of those accused of killing her son, quote, "You can't imagine children you watched playing in the school playground killing your own son. They played together. They stood in the same dinner queue." So what caused these two men to attack Anthony? What had changed since they were at school together that made them commit such a senseless attack? 17-year-old Michael Barton and his cousin, 20-year-old Paul Taylor, lived on the St. John's estate in the town, which was considered to be a rough place to grow up. Youngsters who lived in the estate came from disenfranchised families who felt trapped by the lack of opportunities to better themselves. Like similar estates across the country, this negative setting encouraged criminality, ranging from antisocial behaviour to shoplifting and drugs. Paul Taylor had spent over 2 years at a young offenders institution after being sentenced to a 4-month term for battery, followed by another 21 months for burglary. Locally, he was seen as someone not to be messed with. He allegedly threatened patrons in the Highton Park pub with a hunting knife, and on another occasion with CS gas. His 17-year-old cousin, Michael Barton, had a promising start to life. He was a member of the Territorial Army, becoming a lance corporal, but by the age of 14, he was heading down the wrong path. He dropped out of school. His dream of joining the army was crushed when he failed to pass the entrance exam, and although he tried to secure a job, initially working as a roofer, before trying his hand as a forklift truck operator, he could not stick with it, and he followed Taylor down the route of criminality. G. Walker expressed her opinion, quote, "I believe that all kids are innocent, and something went wrong along the way. What it is, I don't know. Someone planted a seed of hate in their minds. Mothers and fathers blame teachers these days, but it is the parents who should teach the respect and train their children." The attack on Anthony was featured on news headlines and front pages of the newspapers. But when the suspects were named, it added another level of media interest, as Barton was the youngest brother of Premier League footballer Joey Barton, and Taylor was their cousin. Having determined that the perpetrators had fled the country, Joey Barton faced the press and issued the following statement. The horrific killing of Anthony Walker has shocked the country. Those responsible for this senseless death of a kind, decent and caring young man must be brought to justice. My sincere condolences go out to Anthony's family during this terrible time. My side of the Barton family are sickened by his death. Although Michael and I were not brought up together, I urge him now to come forward and give himself up to the police and help them with their investigation. Michael, if you have any information about what happened, you have to tell the police. You must do this for the Walker family, so they can mourn, and you must do this because you know it's right." End quote. At 6:20 the following afternoon, a plane touched down on the runway of Liverpool John Lennon Airport. As the passengers began to disembark, the press captured the moment Michael Barton and Paul Taylor were met by the police. Wearing tracksuits, they had the collars of their jackets pulled up about their faces in an attempt to conceal their features, as they were led to a police van. When the trial commenced in November 2005, the jury were instructed on the events of the 29th of July 2005. They heard how the defendants, Taylor and Barton, had started their day by attempting to steal a quad bike. However, when this failed, they resorted to snorting cocaine and drinking at the Highton Park pub. Meanwhile, Anthony Walker had spent his day attending choir practice at his church, helping his mum at home, and babysitting his nephew with his girlfriend Louise and his cousin Marcus. His 17-year-old cousin Marcus took to the witness stand and explained that he was staying with Anthony's family after attending a family christening. He recalled that on the night of the 29th, he accompanied Anthony and Louise on the 5-minute walk from Anthony's home to the bus stop. He stated that whilst they waited for the bus, he had been looking at his reflection in a phone box, when a man outside the pub started shouting abuse. Anthony advised that they walked away, with the intention of going to a different bus stop, which meant walking through McGoldrick Park. As they headed in that direction, he recalled a Peugeot 406 past them, and then turned right just ahead of them. He noticed that the car was driving at speed and had its lights switched off. He claimed it unnerved him. He continued to explain how they planned to walk through the park and described what happened next. "We were walking at a normal pace, but there was just inner feelings that someone was following. I didn't see anything, it was just a feeling. There is a lot of trees in the park, and it was dark, very dark. I glimpsed towards my left, and I saw a dark, shadowy figure in the bush. It crept out of the bush, I noticed it, and I've told them to run." Marcus proceeded to describe how he was able to get help and was driven back to the park by a local resident and his son. He told the court, quote, "All 3 of us got out the car, walked up, and we saw him lying there. He was in critical condition. He was face up, and there was an axe in his head." Anthony's 17-year-old girlfriend told the court how she ran in fear, quote, "People jumped out of the bushes, about 3 or 4, I think. I couldn't really tell, it was dark. I just saw them jump out, and when Anthony let go, I just ran. I panicked. I didn't look around. I saw Marcus run. He was ahead of me, but went in a different direction." While Paul Taylor entered a plea of guilty, his co-defendant, Michael Barton, maintained his innocence. He took to the stand and spoke about his life, advising that he didn't finish school, admitting that he only managed to get a score of 19 out of 50 on the Army entrance exam, and had become disillusioned with the low-paid jobs he had been working. He proceeded to explain how he had become closer with Taylor just 4 months before the murder. Paul had just finished his sentence at the Young Offenders Institution, where he had been serving a 21-month sentence for burglary. Barton claimed that he began to accompany Taylor on trips to steal, learning different methods to commit the crimes. In return for his help, the 20-year-old would pay Barton £100 a time. With regards to the night of the 29th of July, Barton told investigators that as he and Taylor stood outside the pub, they observed 3 people waiting at the bus stop. One of them, whom Barton identified as Marcus, started heading towards them in an aggressive manner. To avoid a confrontation, Barton claimed he walked away, but Taylor found him at the side of the pub and told him they were going to have a fight, at which point the defendant stated he picked up the ice axe, which had been left next to the pub, and decided to take it with them, apparently to scare Marcus and Anthony. He said Taylor was driving the car aggressively and then parked it up by McGoldrick Park. Barton recalled that, quote, "One of the lads and the girl ran off, so I chased the lad. Paul stayed there." He continued to describe how he pursued Marcus, quote, "I chased the lad up Graham's Road. Then I heard a glass bottle smash, so I went back to the park to see if my cousin was all right." When asked to describe what he witnessed, the defendant stated, quote, "Anthony Walker, he was lying there. He had something out of his head. I tried to help him. I tried to remove the weapon gently. I felt sick and in shock. When I couldn't move it, I ran back to the car. There was blood on the top of my right hand. I kept my hand in front of me, in case blood dripped on my clothes." During the trial, Barton changed his account, possibly in an attempt to minimise his role in the murder. As he stood in the witness box, he now claimed that he had not seen the three people at the bus stop. He denied he was involved in a confrontation outside the pub, and proceeded to explain that he was unaware of the axe until he saw it embedded in Anthony's head. When questioned about why he had changed his story, Barton explained that after he and Taylor had fled to Amsterdam, the pair agreed on the original version, which they thought would ensure that Taylor would be charged with manslaughter, as Marcus had started the confrontation and Taylor had acted in self-defence. He proceeded to claim that Paul had told him to lie to the police, but Neil Flewitt for the prosecution countered this by stating, quote, "You lied through your teeth to help Paul get a manslaughter charge. That has dropped you right in it, hasn't it? It has put you as the person having words with Anthony and Marcus at the bus stop, and it's put the axe in your hands. Now you are keen to abandon your actions and put as much distance in between as you can. You know that if it was you having the argument with these people, and you who took the axe to the park, then you are just as guilty as Paul Taylor. That's why you moved away from that action. It is nothing to do with Paul Taylor. It is to do with you saving your own skin, isn't it?" End quote. Michael Barton stuck to his statement that his original account he told the police was false, and was only created to protect Taylor from a murder charge. Taylor had denied murder, but changed his plea at the beginning of the trial. The prosecution presented to the jury what they believed occurred on the night of Anthony Walker's murder, describing in detail that having gone after Anthony, Marcus and Louise, the two cousins concealed themselves in the park and waited for the trio to walk down the path. When they drew near, Michael and Paul emerged from the shadows. They were unable to get hold of Louise or Marcus, but did trap Anthony, who was knocked to the ground before being struck in the head with the ice axe, with such ferocity that the blade penetrated Anthony's skull to the depth of up to 6 centimetres. It had already been established that Paul Taylor had been the one to strike Anthony with the axe, and he had entered a guilty plea. However, the prosecution argued that it was Michael Barton who supplied the murder weapon. The ice axe was believed to have been stolen by the defendants a couple of days prior to the murder, and he had been witnessed vandalising property with it. As Anthony lay dying on the path, Barton attempted to remove the axe, but it was rooted deep into the teenager's skull. Realising his efforts were in vain, Barton fled with Taylor. Returning to his home, the cousins began to cover their tracks. They proceeded to burn their clothing and took showers. The pair then headed to the Brick Wall pub, where they acquired a Vauxhall Vectra from Paul Mawson. Another acquaintance, Robert Williams, helped them by obtaining Taylor and Barton accommodation in Amsterdam and provided them with financial support. William and Mawson were convicted in May 2006 of assisting an offender, with Mawson receiving an 11-month sentence, while Williams was sentenced to 28 months. CCTV acquired from the ferry port in Dover showed Barton and Taylor boarding the ferry to Calais, with Taylor using his younger brother's passport to get passage. During the trip across the Channel, it was revealed that Michael Barton called his older brother Joey. Prosecutor Neil Flewitt repeated the conversation to the court, quote, "Among other things, he said, 'Listen, I was there, but I didn't kill him. It was Chomper. Chomper killed him. Chomper is Paul Taylor's nickname.'" End quote. Prior to the verdict, the defence stated that Paul Taylor was horrified by his actions and wished to apologise to Anthony Walker's loved ones. G. Walker commented on his show of remorse, stating, quote, "Surely his mum must have instilled some goodness in him, for him to accept that he has done something wrong." The trial concluded after 2 weeks, and as they waited for the verdict, there was a hush in the courtroom. Paul Taylor was found guilty of murder. Having confessed to the crime, he was sentenced to serve a minimum term of 23 years, meaning he will be 43 years old before he will be eligible for parole. The jury agreed that Michael Barton had been the instigator of the attack, due to his use of racist language directed at Marcus and Anthony as the teenagers waited at the bus stop. He was also deemed to be the one who provided the murder weapon, and therefore he was found guilty of murder and was ordered to serve a minimum term of 18 years, which was subsequently reduced to 17 years in 2016. This reduction in his sentence was due to his progress while in prison. It was stated that when the 17-year-old was first imprisoned, his behaviour was, quote, "atrocious." He had several reprimands for acts of violence, thefts, possession of prohibited items, and making a model firearm out of matchsticks. However, 10 years into his term, he had changed his attitude and had demonstrated good behaviour and a desire to help others by becoming a charity volunteer. Back at the trial in 2005, Mr. Justice Levinson summed up the case by addressing Paul Taylor and Michael Barton, quote, "This was a racist attack of a type poisonous to any civilised society. In spite of your youth, deterrent sentences are vital. You took from Anthony Walker his most precious possession, that is to say, his life, and all it held for him. He was a young man of enormous promise, lost in a moment. You have damaged forever the lives of those who loved him." He turned to Barton and told him that although he did not wield the axe, he was jointly responsible for the murder. "This was a terrible incident, and you played a full part in jointly bringing the ice axe to further your terrifying attack. You knew what you intended to do as you drove searching out your quarries, and you crept into the park with evil on your mind. The terror evident in Marcus Binns and Louise Thompson proves beyond all reasonable doubt that this was not simply two groups bumping into each other. I am sure that the fear the defendants generated was deliberate, and the plan was premeditated." G. Walker stood outside the court, surrounded by her family, and she told the press, quote, "At the point of death, Jesus said, 'I forgive them, for they know not what they do.' I have to forgive them. No amount of time, no sentence, no matter how long, it will not bring my son back." In my opinion, G. Walker is an incredible woman. To have lost her son in such a brutal manner, yet guided by her faith in God, she is able to demonstrate compassion, forgiveness and strength. She was, however, deeply affected by the reduction in Barton's sentence, which she revealed in an interview with ITV News, quote, "It is a big letdown. I am very disappointed and I feel deeply betrayed. We put our trust in the judges, in the law, and then they go and do this. It's just wrong. This sends completely the wrong message to criminals. It tells them that if they pretend to be good, they will win. I don't believe what he has done in prison is anything more than pretense. I believe he is playing a game, and he sees that he is winning by doing that." End quote. The latest reports state that Michael Barton has a parole hearing scheduled for October this year, in which it will be decided if he is eligible for release. As for Paul Taylor, he will be behind bars until at least 2028. Due to the lack of reports regarding his time in prison, he seems to be demonstrating good behaviour. However, in 2011, a racist post appeared on his Facebook page. He denied creating the post and did apologise for any pain it may have caused. The Liverpool Echo reported on G. Walker's response to this post, quote, The family and I are shocked by this. I thought prison was meant to be for punishment and rehabilitation, not for networking and socialising with partners in crime. There was a lot of focus on the fact that the two perpetrators were related to the Premier League footballer Joey Barton. But we should not forget that they stole the life of a teenage boy who had a promising future. Anthony Walker had aspired to pursue a career in law, and although his dream was stolen from him, others are able to have an opportunity thanks to the Crime Prosecution Service in Merseyside, who in 2008 established the CPS Anthony Walker Law Scholarship, which helps to provide funding for black or ethnic minority students to be able to take the legal practice course. His death and the police investigation that followed inspired Anthony's older sister Dominique, who is now a serving officer in the police force. She referred to her decision to join the force, quote, "I felt I should have protected my brother. I'm his older sister, the closest in age. We've always protected each other. We were muckers. I wasn't able to have the chance to save him. It's probably why I'm in the police force, because I'm able to protect people and help others." When Anthony was laid to rest on the 25th of August 2005, over 3,000 people attended the service, many wearing shirts from the various sports teams. One of the most poignant tributes came from William Eberle, who had been a teenage friend of Anthony's, quote, "Anthony was one of those special people who graces your life, and I'll feel lucky forever knowing that I met him, and that we called each other friends, even best friends. Anthony talked to me when no one else would. He would play with me and insist I join in football games to make friends when no one else cared. I always felt honoured he chose me as a friend because Anthony was popular with everyone. Nobody had a bad word for him. Yet he chose to be friends with me, the geek of the year. He always made you feel more important with his concern for you, giving you a confidence boost. I wish I'd made a move to stay in touch sooner. I missed out on finding out who he'd become, and I'll always regret this deeply." In 2006, the Anthony Walker Foundation was born out of his loved one's desire to ensure his name would no longer be a symbol of tragedy. According to a statement on the website, the Foundation's aim is of working to tackle racism, hate crimes and discrimination by providing educational opportunities, victim support services, and by promoting equality and inclusion for all. The Foundation's vision, quote, "is one of global society where race, religion and ethnicity do not label any person or put them at risk, where racial intolerance, violence is unacceptable, and cultural diversity is embraced." To offer your support or to learn more about the Anthony Walker Foundation, please follow the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me for episode 36 of It's Murder Up North. Episode 37 will be available next week, so in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.